Hey guys, just a quick note before we get started. I recorded this interview Monday the 18th, and today we see the Chinese buying silver as the Bank of America says momentum breaking out to its highest in years. Silver over 17 at one point today. And of course, things changed at the SGE today on April 19th. Boy, when things change as quickly as they're changing now, guys, SGT Report is the place to be. And thank you for tuning in. Hey guys, thanks for joining us. It is Monday, the 18th of April, and am I fired up? I have Andy Hoffman from Miles Franklin back on the line, and I got to tell you guys, all hell is breaking loose. And you might say, well, what? The Dow's at 18,000. These guys are off their rocker. Everything's fine. Look, last week, Fed, Obama, secret meetings with Yellen. Deutsche Bank has confessed to rigging the silver and then the gold markets. Class action lawsuits have already been filed. The Saudis have threatened to sell their $750 billion in treasuries if the U.S. Congress votes to release the 28 pages of classified material from the 9/11 Commission report. Venezuela's in absolute chaos. Japan's massive earthquakes equal more pain for a nation already on the precipice of economic Armageddon and hyperinflation. And the list goes on and on. Andy, I just had to lay that out for you. Where would you like to begin?
And don't forget, of course, the impeachment vote for the Brazilian president just yesterday, only 4 months before the Olympics that may not happen. And the Doha meeting, the energy meeting yesterday that wasn't, which I had said beforehand was going to be the most overhyped non-story in economic history, which of course it was, because there's no way there's ever going to be production cuts from a bunch of nations and corporations and municipalities, for that matter, that are desperate for cash.
Well, Andy, I want to talk to you about this Deutsche Bank situation. I've got a theory. I want to share it with you, but first I want your thoughts. Amazing that Deutsche Bank confessed to rigging the silver and gold markets last week. I think Jeffrey Christian, Gary Gensler, and some of the guys over at the CFTC have some explaining to do, don't you think?
Yeah, and by the way, people forget that UBS 2 years ago admitted the same thing. This is not the first admission by Wall Street Bank. But then again, it's certainly not the first admission from the powers that be, given that so many central bank governors, from Eddie George, who was the head of the Central Bank of England back in 2000, to Alan Greenspan himself, to the BIS just in 2011, admitted that they manipulate gold prices. But in Deutsche Bank's case, it's particularly interesting because as a too big to fail bank, and one, as you mentioned, with this giant derivatives book, which is under pressure, it's amazing to believe that they were actually allowed to admit anything. I'm surprised they weren't protected, because this is going to open a whole new can of worms, not just of lawsuits, but of global perception that markets, gold and silver markets, are heavily suppressed.
Yeah, and here's where my theory kicks in. So, you know that the regulators in Germany, I believe it's BaFin, correct me if I'm wrong, the regulators in Germany have been crawling up Deutsche Bank's back end with a magnifying glass. I think the regulators in Germany might be a little bit more serious than the regulators in the United States, Andy, and here's my theory. Deutsche Bank has that 1.1 trillion in derivatives that they were trying to offload, and Bloomberg was reporting that it was JP Morgan and Goldman who were said to be discussing the purchase of those derivatives from Deutsche Bank. It strikes me that maybe, you know, in the spirit of Lehman Brothers, there were some unscrupulous threats being made in the background, and maybe Deutsche Bank said, okay, you guys going to play that card? Here's our card. We're going to admit to rigging, and then we're going to bring you down with us. Just a theory, but what are your thoughts on that, Andy?
Well, look, you know, the walls are closing in around, again, I say the powers that be. I don't mean that it's one small group of people. I mean that it's the leaders of the banks and the governments and the corporations in many nations that all have the same goals, which is to maintain the status quo. And when you're talking about collapsing commodities and currencies and economies and manipulation schemes and social unrest around the world, I mean, it gets harder and harder to play this game. And of course, in the end game, it's a dog-eat-dog world. That's why, you know, all these talks about people getting together and trying to control the world are difficult, because you have so many parties that have differing interests. And this is a perfect example. You know, why was Deutsche Bank allowed to, quote, fail on their ability to not talk about their suppression? I don't know. Why was Lehman Brothers chosen to not be able to be protected from that? And you know, Deutsche Bank, part of the settlement, they said we're going to be potentially ratting out, you know, like in Goodfellas, our partners in this. You know, the funny thing about the whole scheme is, though, no one's talking about how they are suppressing prices, just that they are, quote, manipulating prices. When, of course, the bigger story is that they have been suppressing prices as the partner of the government. They work together to prolong the status quo. Now, I really, truly believe that this event is not in and of itself going to change anything. But again, it's pieces of a puzzle. It's higher institutional demand. It's the Shanghai fix. It's the spreading of the word of manipulation of markets, and of course it's economic mother nature herself, and the ramifications that are all together closing in on those that are trying to maintain the unmaintainable.
Yeah, and that Shanghai Gold fix, I believe it's the physical fix, takes effect tomorrow. We're having this conversation on Monday the 18th. I think it's April 19th that SGE physical gold fix goes into place. Is that correct?
Yeah, again, it's just another piece of the puzzle, but a big one, because ultimately, when you're talking about that, the majority, the vast majority, not just the small majority, the vast majority of the global demand and production is coming from the East, eventually you're going to see the pricing comes from the East. We're going to wake up in the United States in years to come, maybe a lot sooner than we think, and we'll have already seen what the prices did for the day out in the East, whereas now we wake up waiting for what will happen on the COMEX. And I truly believe that that's just a part and parcel of the end game of physical demand and physical pricing moving to where it should be, where the demand and the supply is.
Yeah, I just did an interview with writer David Jensen from safehaven.com. At least that's where the majority of his material appears. And David made the point about the SGE and about this move away from the LBMA and the paper Ponzi, right? This post-LBMA era, which we're now entering. And his point was the Asian banks and the players on the SGE are not going to accept paper for settlement from the Western banks. These guys are dealing in physical, and that's the sea change. That's the game changer, Andy, on a global scale.
Right. Remember, we had that fraudulent silver fix, what was it, 2 months ago? I think it was the end of February. And then 3 days later, five of the 20 or 30 biggest miners that trade on the LBMA, including Rio Tinto, which is the largest, second largest miner in the world, just abruptly resigned their seats. And I had written an article that day saying something like the most important news in gold market history, trying to say that now that the rig is being widely understood, if the miners start to leave the game, and of course, now they're going to move the fix over to the East, and now you're seeing some of the big banks like Deutsche Bank being caught red-handed. It just makes it harder and harder to maintain this game. And of course, by maintaining this game, what they have done is they've created the scenario where you have global demand at an all-time high. The above-ground inventories have been vanishing, whether it's from the COMEX or the LBMA or the GLD. And of course, now production is destined to fall for years to come because the industry was strangled for so many years. And of course, in silver's case, because 2/3 of all the silver produced comes from copper, lead, and zinc mines, which are heavily oversupplied. So you have a perfect storm in the coming years of supply, demand, money printing, inventories, all because of the suppression scheme, which is closing in on them. The walls are closing in, kind of like Batman in one of his bat traps.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, while we're having this in-the-moment interview, I want to read a comment that was posted at SGT Report at 12:09 p.m. Central Time on Monday. It's from Jesse, and Jesse writes, Sean, I've listened to your podcast for some time, and I'm very appreciative of your work. Call me exceptionally cynical, but I don't see the Deutsche Bank news as a game changer. There have already been admissions of banks manipulating metals for gain, which you just cited, UBS, Andy. I think it's important to distinguish between knocking the price around a bit on options expiration to get a favorable strike and systemic manipulation coming out of the BIS and the Fed. Until it is revealed and admitted that precious metals are manipulated at the highest levels for reasons beyond short-term settlements, I don't see it as a game changer. Thanks again for your show. All right, my thoughts on that, Andy, are this. It's a game changer in this regard. Deutsche Bank has agreed to turn state's evidence. Deutsche Bank is willing to give up the goods, apparently, on the other criminal banks. And Deutsche Bank has now exposed itself to massive class action lawsuits, including a $1 billion lawsuit filed in federal court in New York just the other day. And by the way, I may have news on that in the near future. I've already reached out to and spoken with one of the attorneys on that case via email. The case that has been filed is on behalf of all people in Canada who between 1999 and August 14th, 2014, lost money in the silver market. But I'm in contact with one of the attorneys to see what the possibility is of filing a lawsuit in the United States for those of us in the United States who have been victims of this criminality. That alone, Andy, to me is a game changer.
Well, again, it's a mosaic. Yes, game changer in that it's certainly an important event, but I also agree with that person's email. It's right on. Look, there's no single event that can change anything outside of like a major terrorist attack or or a devaluation overnight of the yuan by like 20%, something really jarring, because the manipulators still have a lot of control. But the fact is, it's a mosaic that's being built over a period of years in which the very processes that they use, the manipulation, the money printing, the propaganda, to maintain the status quo are all falling apart around them. That is, the collapsing economy, currencies have collapsed. And of course, the gold price, which in most currencies around the world is at near, or in many cases, well above its all-time high. So that's only spurring on more demand around the world. And the more that they try to attack the price, the more and keep the price down, the more it's going to bring in more price-sensitive buyers. And then when you throw in all the information spreading over the internet, stuff like Deutsche Bank, and cumulatively, it's a game changer, because the best and most important part of what we have going for us is reality, the tsunami of reality, of economic mother nature. We have the winds at our back, because no matter what they want to do, they're not going to accomplish anything more than printing money and watching it all fail about them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me ask you this. The other big piece of news that came out last week is that the Saudi government is now openly threatening the U.S. government, saying if Congress releases the classified 28 pages of the 9/11 report, which obviously implicate the Saudis in helping to fund that act of terror, they have threatened to sell their $750 billion in U.S. treasuries. And my question to you, Andy, number one is, what does that say about the Saudis? I think it says that they're guilty as hell. And B, who would buy those treasuries? I'm looking at the major foreign holders of treasury securities right now from treasury.gov. And the number one holder of U.S. treasuries is still China with $1.2 trillion as of February 2016. And number two is Japan with $1.1 trillion. Now, Japan being a proxy of the United States government, Japan has been forced, I think, to buy these treasuries, but they can't buy many more. They're already on the verge of bankruptcy and hyperinflation. Who do the Saudis honestly think would even buy that trash, Andy?
Well, to answer your I mean, the majority of the hijackers were Saudi. So, I mean, to say that there was no involvement. But again, that's not my area of expertise. I'm not saying I know who was saying what and doing what. I just, the one thing I'll steadfastly say is the story that we are told doesn't make any sense with the science that's out there. But that's another story.
That's right.
As for who will buy the treasuries, well, it'll be the Fed. They buy everything. Japan buys all of its own treasuries. The Europeans buy all of their own, plus the corporate bonds, and the Fed will buy the rest of theirs. Even if they say that they're not doing it, even if they have to do it covertly. But again, with the Saudi, to me, the news that they're so openly threatening us, the bigger news has more to do, to me, with what's going on in the oil markets. It's not a coincidence to me that they have this meeting that was hyped that Saudi Arabia was going to have this production freeze, and then all of a sudden they don't have a production freeze right at the same time, because who's going to get hurt by that the most? We are. So obviously the tensions between the United States and its former allies, be they in Europe or the Middle East or China or even Japan, are being frayed at the edges. Look at the comments last week from the Chinese economics minister talking about how, we want to have stable currencies around the world. However, that doesn't preclude us from doing further devaluation of the yen. So, you have currency wars, you have diplomatic wars, military wars. And so, again, it's a dog-eat-dog world. I think everyone is out for themselves. And as the fiat currency scheme worldwide is in its death throes, I think you're going to see more and more contention the world around. And honestly, I don't think that the Saudis' treasury card really holds anything compared to its oil card, because if it chooses, as I believe it will, to maintain its market share in a declining demand market, they can destroy the oil price.
Well, I think it's an interesting sign of the times that our former quote-unquote allies, again, the Saudis about as much a proxy of the United States as Japan, in my opinion, but it's funny to see our former allies, Andy, threatening to destroy the dollar, because that's what that threat is. It's a threat to sell the treasuries and bring down the dollar. This country is ripe for blackmail. I mean, all of our former allies, anybody that holds treasuries, China, Japan, the Saudis, they can threaten to destroy the dollar if we don't do what they want us to do. That's not a very great place for a sovereign nation to be.
Although I would say none of those places have much leverage either, because anything they do is going to hurt themselves. Yeah. I mean, if Japan decided to sell $1 trillion of treasuries and interest rates went up, it would have cataclysmic impact on global interest rates and on their own bond market. So it wouldn't help them any, and that's why they don't do it. It's kind of like the eternal Hobson's choice. I mean, you can't win no matter what you do. So they choose not to upset the apple cart because they think that'll keep them in power the longer. But all that does, by prolonging it and not doing it, they're just making the imbalances worse. So whether some giant event causes someone to tip over the edge and do something stupid, or something singularly stupid, or they continue to do the cumulatively stupid thing, the end game is going to be as bad as anything that we've ever seen. And really, it's only a question of, will it be a single event like in World War I? That start everything, or will it be a more gradual process? And there's really no way of knowing, because we've never seen such manipulative forces and such devastating economic and political and social forces all coming together at the same time.
All right. Well, before we end this call, Andy, I just want to circle back to the Deutsche Bank lawsuits which have been filed. I think this is extremely important for anybody who is listening who has lost money because of their silver and gold investments, be they in physical silver and gold company mining shares, or silver and gold ETFs. If you lost money at the hands of the criminal cartel, you may be eligible for remedy, and I'm going to follow this very closely. Like I said, I have reached out to one of the attorneys, and so far, Andy, there have been 2 class action lawsuits seeking $1 billion in damages. I want to keep the readers and listeners up to date on this very important development, because if you lost money, like I have, at the hands of the criminal manipulation of silver and gold prices, you may be able to recover some damages. I think it's a very important story. Let me read just a little bit from the lawsuit, Andy. The first class action alleges that the defendants, including the Bank of Nova Scotia, conspired to manipulate prices in the silver market under the guise of the benchmark fixing process known as the London Silver Fixing for a 15-year period. And more from that lawsuit. This is coming from Zero Hedge. This alleged conduct affected not only those investors who bought and sold physical silver, but those who bought and sold silver-related financial instruments. Andy, I think it's a very important story, because it's the first time I've seen that the average Joe may be able to get into this game and try to punish these banks for their criminality.
Well, again, the more pressure you could put on, the better. I sense in this case it's the lawyers that'll make all the money. And it won't be an easy thing to get done. But the more pressure on the Deutsche Banks of the world and their backers, the more difficult it's going to be. And there's going to be a lot of pressure coming from a lot of directions on these guys in the coming months and years.
All right. Well, there's going to be a lot of pressure, I think, on the middle class here in the United States in the coming months and years too, Andy. We're getting it from all sides through higher taxation, higher inflation, more unemployment, none of which the government will admit to. And we've got a Federal Reserve chair who is meeting in private with the President of the United States. As I started the interview, Andy, I think all hell is breaking loose. Your final thoughts?
Yes, well, I mean, the reason that they're meeting is probably pretty simple. They're trying to figure out a way to win the election by continuing to say that the economy is doing well, even though it's not, and continuing to keep interest rates down, even though the Fed said they would raise them if the economy was getting better. And so they're going to have to eventually. They're going to have to do something before the election, because the economic data is just going to keep getting worse and worse. And again, I wrote an article last week called "Emergency Meetings," talking about that one and saying that we're starting to have a pace of emergency meetings, including yesterday's Doha oil meeting, sort of like we had in 2008, 2009, because so many things are going wrong, overtly and covertly. And the last thought I'll have, of course, is that it's now Monday morning. Now Thursday night, which is just 3 days from now, is Miles Franklin's Q&A rap session in Fort Lauderdale, which will be broadcast over the internet worldwide. It'll be a live interactive webinar, so for no charge at all, you can listen to the proceedings, which are hosted by Kerry Lutz, featuring myself and Andy Schekman, our president. You can ask all the questions you want online, and then we will answer them over the course of the evening. If you are interested in attending the Fort Lauderdale meeting or simply listening to it online, please email me at ahoffman@milesfranklin.com.
All right, very good, Andy. Well, thanks for the In the Moment update. We very much appreciate it. Our guest has been Andy Hoffman. Andy, thank you so much.
Thanks as usual, Sean.
All right, my friend. And guys, thank you for tuning in. We very much appreciate your support at sgtreport.com and thelibertymill.com. Real news 24/7. God bless.